first story was posted 7 years ago by a Reddit user named Throw It Away for Once. A very sheltered roommate I had living downstairs was very open about her singing. She had no shame and talent to match. Singing Cher's Believe was one of her Saturday morning go-tos. Hey, it could be worse, right? Well, maybe. 5 a.m. is just too early for Cher. But what was most disturbing was her Backstreet Boys rendition of I Want It That Way. This is when things get odd. Maybe she was just trolling me, but she wouldn't belt out this tune when she got ready for bed after an evening shift. The odd thing about it was how long she would sing it for. There were nights where I would wake up at 4 a.m. and she was still singing, just as bad and just as passionate. I had enough. I went downstairs to ask her to wait until morning. But it was dark, no lights at all. Even in her room, it was dark. 4 a.m. and she's singing her heart out in bed. So I knock and the singing stops. She opens the door all confused and she barely has a voice left. The next morning, I apologized for surprising her, but I couldn't sleep with all her Backstreet Boys singing. She doesn't understand what I'm talking about, but it suddenly occurred to me that she was singing in her sleep. Every night. So how could I expect her to just not sing in her sleep? Maybe she was trolling me. But for 8 months, this little woman with no friends and no family close by sung Backstreet Boys in her sleep. Second story was posted 3 years ago by a Reddit user named Starshine29. Had a crazy weeboo for a roommate my freshman year of college. I think I've posted about this somewhere else on Reddit, but I'll tell it again. We got along alright for a little while. She was kinda quiet and would just go up into her bunk and watch Death Note or whatever else all day. And when she wasn't in her bunk, she'd sit at her desk and look over and stare at me every so often, really creepily. At first, I asked her why she was staring at me, and she'd just blink and look away, then laugh really quietly a few minutes later. It was kinda annoying, but I learned to ignore it. Sometimes her friends would come over and watch anime with her, or bring their manga collection and lay them all over the floor. So I would just leave and go to a friend's dorm. If I stayed in the room, they'd ask me awkward questions, like about me being agnostic. They were all really religious. Or if I knew this or that anime. I don't watch anime, so I never did. One of her friends sent me a message on Facebook once telling me she hoped I got gangrene at one of the parties you always go to and died, just out of the blue. I'm not sure how I'd get gangrene at a party, but whatever. I didn't tell my roommate about it to avoid confrontation. Then, one day, I was alone in the room and talking to my friend on the phone. Roommate walks in, kinda in a huff, and sits down at her computer. I didn't really pay much attention to her after that and continued talking on the phone. My friend and I were talking about a girl we know, and we were laughing a lot. Suddenly, roommate jumped up and started screaming at me about how I apparently am a giant bitch, and how my friends and I always make fun of her, and how I think I'm so cool and all of this other stuff. I was kinda in shock and asked her what the fuck her problem was. She grabbed my phone from me, slammed it down on the floor, and grabbed my hair, trying to shake my head. Thoroughly freaked out, I hit at her to try and get her off, and ended up putting the heel of my hand into her eye pretty hard. She ended up running off to the RA and now having a swelling black eye. Told her that I had suddenly gotten up, walked across the room and started beating her up. The story sorta worked since she had a black eye and I didn't have any visible marks. We were moved into separate rooms and had to both meet with the hall coordinator, but it ended up working out in my favor. After the incident, I guess the roommate went to a bunch of RAs and her Bible study coordinators and told them all differing and outlandish stories. That I had put her in the hospital, destroyed her laptop, etc. And the whole coordinator said she flat out thought the girl was crazy and didn't believe her story. I haven't heard from my crazy roommate since the night she attacked me. She transferred to a different school after that semester. Third story was posted 6 years ago by a Reddit user named Reason and Madness. I had a few roommates when I was living in the dorms my freshman year in college. They were good people all in all, and we had some good times. But as with just about every college experience for most of us, there was one guy who liked to drink a lot. One night, I came home at like 3 in the morning to find our drunk roommate just standing over one of our other roommates' beds, staring at him awkwardly in this odd Walking Dead looking stupor. I could tell he was plastered because he was kinda rocking around in silence in the dark. Honestly, it was a bit creepy, so I called out to him in a whisper, "Mike." He turned his head towards me relatively quickly, head bobbing all around, and slowly raised his finger in front of his mouth and quietly shh me like fucking Elmer Fudd hunting rabbits. He held his finger there for another few seconds and nearly incoherently muttered, "Fuck this guy." If you could permit me to quickly paint a picture of what Mike looked like and what Rob looked like, you'll understand why this was a really huge problem. They were as polar opposite as you could imagine, in just about every capacity. Mike was a surfer from Los Angeles, shorter, skinnier kid with long hair and a stoner attitude. Rob, on the other hand, grew up on a farm and was substantially larger and substantially more fit than Mike, and he never fucked around. Dude was serious, always. Now, Mike must have already had it out without me noticing because he was primed and ready to fire without me even realizing what was going on. All I heard was the sound of water hitting cloth, and that's when I saw it. He had started to pee on Rob, who up until that moment was fast asleep. Rob, waking up to what he thought was just warm water, quickly realized what was happening and proceeded to jump out of bed and grabbed Mike, who was still peeing on him up until this point, and threw him across the room, off the far wall. He looked like a fucking rag doll bouncing off the wall, hitting the desk below and then onto the ground. Mike didn't say a word. He stood up, quietly tucked himself in, and proceeded to walk right past Rob and climb back into his bed. Rob looked at me, looked at our other roommate who was now awake behind me, and looked back at Mike. All of us had this dumbfounded look on our face except Mike, who was of course, within the seconds, already starting to quietly snore. I honestly will never forget the sight of Rob standing there in the middle of the room with urine dripping down his face, off his shoulders and down his arms, with this absolute befuddled look on his face as he tried to process what the fuck just happened. I think it angered him more to hear Mike snoring because he angrily turned to his bed and tried to wake him up by shaking him, violently at first, and then hitting him in his back, arms and head. Nothing. Mike was out cold. The rest of the year went as you could imagine. It was an experience.